Oh, I think it's very nice to see different perspectives. Even, when you say physicists, they come with different backgrounds and different interests. Like you have quantum computing, you can have quantum information theory, and people have different understandings at different levels. I'm just trying to go for something a bit more challenging next time. Like I enjoy it, but I also want to see where my capacity is, like where I reach a boundary. And then I extrapolated to posting some, I don't know, PhD positions because I had that kind of audience on my page. And I was very happy, getting a text from someone saying, "Oh, thank you. I applied to this position." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Good luck."
Welcome to the Polymath Podcast, highlighting your multidisciplinary life, showcasing that it's okay to do many different things. Hello, I'm Dustin, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Andreea Lefterovici, Doctoral Candidate, Quantum Computing Researcher, Double Masters, budding content creator, and polymathic scientist. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Podcast.
Thank you very, very much for the invitation.
I think we're going to have a great conversation today, and I'm just excited to have you on for one of your first podcasts in your life, so it's great to have that experience. I'm hoping that maybe we could have a really interesting dialogue when it comes to quantum computing. A lot of it's probably going to go over my head, but I'm willing to open up my mind to try to learn it.
That's amazing.
The first question I have here, and we'll figure out how we'll answer it, is what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
Yes, so 5 years ago, I was just starting my master's degree in Germany in physics, and it was my first experience abroad. So until then, I never studied abroad, and it was really, I don't know, it just really opened my mind, I would say. I think, I used to see myself as an open-minded person, and then I came here, and I wouldn't say that I had a cultural shock or anything, but I just got to know so many people, so many different people from different cultures, and it was really eye-opening.
I like that. Where were you for your bachelor's?
So I'm from Romania, and hence I did my bachelor at University of Bucharest, also in physics.
Yeah. So how many degrees do you have at this point?
So at this point, I have my bachelor in physics, and I have 2 masters in physics. So I did them in parallel. One was at my university in Romania. The other one was in Germany at the University of Bonn. And then I started to be a doctoral candidate in Hanover. And I also recently started a master in mathematics. So this is my first semester. Yeah, I think these are my degrees. And beside this, I also had this kind of teaching degree during my bachelor, but I'm not sure if it's really counted like a bachelor, like an educational bachelor, or it's just
minor
something
or something like that.
Yeah.
What interested you in physics then, from a young age, or just from, young adult age?
I would say a young adult age. So when I was a kid, of course, I was fascinated by the things around me, but not that fascinated. And then when I was in my 10th grade, at the end, my physics teacher, she showed us a video about fractals. And that was my starting point. Like at that point, I just said, okay, I want to do physics. And that was it. Until then, I just wanted to go, to medical school or to be a lawyer or everything.
Yeah. So what about fractals interested you so much?
I simply liked the structure of them. Like I was simply fascinated by the pictures that she was showing us with this zooming in and seeing the same pattern. I just thought that that's amazing at that point.
And how, no matter how big or small you get, it's basically the same.
Yes, exactly.
It makes me think of the graphics design with SVGs. No matter what size SVG you have, it's basically the same. It's really interesting. Mathematical based art.
Yes, exactly.
And so what makes you so passionate about physics and just overall quantum computing at this point?
I think I'm very curious, and I'm also interested in the practicality of things. Like I, of course, had my very abstract periods going into quite abstract physics or abstract mathematics, but now I'm really focused into the practicality, like giving something to the world. I think maybe I went from some egoistic behavior to something more altruistic. This also with respect to the question that you posed the first time. And yeah, I really want to make a contribution that matters in the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are multidisciplinary in this world, and there's kind of this difference between being multidisciplinary and doing something with your multidisciplinary life. And contributing to different fields, I think, is the key to doing a lot of that, regardless if it's through academia or through content or through maybe just a book or something like that, as long as you contribute something.
Yes. And I find that really beautiful. Like, put the things that you have, put the knowledge that you have to some good work. And I think that's very rewarding.
Yeah. It's rewarding for me to do this show because I get to talk to people who are polymathic and get to experience your mindset. And it's interesting too, because for me, I struggled with math growing up. I actually did self teach myself some calculus as a young adult for a variety of different reasons, actually, at that point. But I struggled at basic algebra. And it was one of those things where because science really overlaps a lot with math when you get later on into the skills, I found myself kind of almost at a hard limit at that point. But I do believe that everyone can learn it. And so it makes me curious about how your brain works and how you are thinking, because it seems like you picked it up so easily. And I say that probably not knowing all the hard difficulties you faced. So you can definitely tell me about that here in a moment. But like, I'm just curious about how your brain works and what were the challenges for you. And did you think that you were a science person from a young age, or did you just, like I said, adopt it in a young adult fully?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I don't know how my brain works. I think sometimes it's quite random, but I have periods when I have this super narrow focus, and there are some topics that I can understand in a few hours, maybe in a day, and they could be complicated. So sometimes this happens, but other times maybe I need a month to understand something that maybe is trivial for other people. So I would say
Yeah.
it's quite random. And I don't know if I saw myself as a scientist all the time. Maybe at some point, but I also saw myself as a doctor or as a lawyer. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I wonder if it's also just because you are in a time in your life where you're in a big transition. You are learning, you are becoming obviously this doctoral candidate. And so you're in that stage where things are in flux and you're working really hard. And once this is over, you'll be able to kind of shift towards something new or maybe shift to the next step or whatever it might be. And so what's interesting about that too is that whenever you are learning a new skill, do you think there's something that like maybe because you're so hyper focused on this right now, you might not be able to think of it. But is there something that you're curious about right now that you might not have time for to learn, but you want to learn down the line?
Yes. But I think this is more regarding to soft skills,
Huh?
like how to give good presentations or how to talk to a large public, or I don't know what's beside a business. What is a CEO doing in a company, for example. I think these things are of interest to me.
Shout out to another quantum physicist, Anastasia Martinkova, who does Leadership for Introverts is her course. And so that might be helpful too. Are you more extroverted or introverted by
I
chance?
think I'm an ambivert.
Okay, so
I
am
would
I. So
say.
I get it, yeah. Which is interesting too, because it's always really fascinating to me that no one is ever just like one or the other. We're all kind of a mix, but there's people like us who are literally like in the middle. And it's interesting to think about you could be a shy extrovert and you could be a very sociable introvert. And then when you're an ambivert, oftentimes you kind of get pulled between those two different things. Like I kind of want to stay home, I kind of want to go out.
Yeah.
I often found myself going out on the nights that I didn't want to stay in. It wasn't because I wanted to go out; it's because I just didn't want to be at home.
Yeah, I can relate to this.
Yeah, and I think that too. The reason why I brought it up is that that can directly, correlate to a lot of your soft skills too. If you are more introverted, you might not have had as much practice. That's a generalization, so I'm not saying that. But as an ambivert too, I found myself having to actually train myself different skills, despite the fact I like talking. So the next kind of question here, it's a broad one. So good luck on answering it. But what is quantum computing?
That's a very good question. I don't know what kind of definitions people usually give, but I would say it's the intersection of multidisciplinary fields like physics, mathematics, and computer science, in which you use the principles of quantum mechanics to try to solve complex problems faster than classical computers could. But maybe this is a very practical answer to quantum computing.
I think practicality is useful because to a lot of people, quantum computing still is very ethereal. It still seems very out there. And something I'm very passionate about is futurism and seeing where the future of humanity lies. And I think one pivotal point, obviously AI is one of those things, but I think quantum computing is another one of those things where depending on what we do now, that's going to make a dramatic shift on how humanity progresses. Again, you may not be able to use quantum computing for everything, but in the cases that we can, it'll help out a lot. Do you have any ideas about particular use cases?
Well, people are hoping for a lot of use cases, for example, to solve logistics problems or in general, all kind of optimization problems. But we just have to see when the hardware is there if these problems can actually be solved or not. You know, there was recently this BMW Airbus competition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at the winners, at least for this logistic problem, when I say winners, I mean the second phase candidates. Two of the participants, they came from some classical software companies. And for me, that was amazing because I was like, oh, these people have some solutions to some very large problems. And I'm super curious to see what kind of project proposals they had because it was a competition related to quantum computing. And I'm very curious what solutions came from people doing classical computing.
And what's interesting too is you mentioned earlier about having that hyper focus, and there's a difference between hyper focus and hyper specialization. And when you hyper specialize, you're in that narrow trench. You're so deep into that trench, you can't reach over and look what's in the trench next to you. And so when you're being in that multidisciplinary environment, whether that is just you individually or in a group, you get to see multiple trenches and you get to see the solutions for multiple different fields. And that helps you think with that transcontextual thinking, like what can I pull from swimming and apply it to quantum physics? Like that doesn't make much sense, but when you translate what you know from that into this, it helps you learn that new skill. And so I'm excited the way that you're talking about there is that like even though it's more traditional computing, you're seeing it as a potential. You're seeing it as like, okay, what can I learn from that?
Yes, exactly. Because, you know, these people are experts in this kind of problem. So they really know what they are doing. So it's fascinating to just learn from them and see if, for what they used the power, so to say, of quantum computers, because realistically speaking, the hardware that we have now is very small. So I'm very curious how they made use of it in their solutions.
And we're still, I guess, on the bleeding edge, maybe towards the middle of the bleeding edge, I guess, at this point when it comes to this new field. And something I was thinking about before we joined this call today, Andrea, was that I was like, we learned a lot from like Alan Turing or Ada Lovelace, who were the futurists when it came to the classical computer. But I'm thinking, like, what were the researchers in the 1960s and the 1970s thinking about? And what were they saying in their papers? I'm sure you probably read a couple of them at some point too, but I'm just curious about like what was their mindset and what was the problems they were facing and how did they tackle those problems? And then how can we take that strategy that they used and apply it to current endeavors?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the first person who proposed the use of quantum computers and imagined the first quantum computer was Feynman.
Mhm.
And from here, I would say the field just got a kickstart because, you know, everyone admires and appreciates him. So they just listened to him and he was trying to solve problems relating to physics. So he was not going into this direction of combinatorial optimization, but literally problems coming from the physics. For example, so many body problems. And I think for this kind of problems, when we will have quantum computers, then there is a huge potential.
Yeah. And Feynman's obviously a great example too. It's just interesting to think about the way he thought was just pure curiosity and pure trying to just share knowledge. And I think that very polymathic in a way too. I wish that I could interview him at this point too. But it's funny because when I started learning how to do self-development or self-education, the Feynman technique came up multiple times and learning how to break things down into the smaller chunks. There's a really cool YouTube series where this expert explains the same concept, including I think one episode on quantum physics, to a 5-year-old, to a middle schooler, to a high school kid, to a college kid, and then an actual researcher in the field. And they were like just slightly below them, I guess, in that whole hierarchy. And it's just interesting how they took that same concept and explained it to different age groups and different levels of understanding. And I think if we can break it down like that and break down the problems, like how can I explain this problem more simply to someone? Then if I can explain the problem simply, maybe I can solve it simply too, which is an ideal situation, but curious
Yes.
nonetheless.
Yes. So this is kind of what I'm trying to do via Instagram mostly. Make these very short reels or posts in which I try to just give some very small information that I believe is understandable or accessible to everyone that can read, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crowdsourcing it, if you will. Speaking of your reels and content, what made you want to start making content around quantum and quantum computing?
So I saw a lot of misinformation over the internet. I saw a lot of hype about quantum computing, and then I saw people who are trying to keep it as realistic as possible. Like, for example, you interviewed Anastasia Marchenkova, and she's one of the people who keeps it real. And she
Yeah.
says, that's what it's there. Yeah, there is also Olivia Lanes from IBM. She also keeps it super real. And I just thought, oh, I want to be one of these people, and I want to target not only, business people or whatever, but I also want to target some young audience, because if you train kids from now on, then they will be the future experts.
Mhm.
So I think it's just a good idea to spread some knowledge, and maybe they will be interested, and maybe they will pursue something in this direction in 10 years from now.
Yeah. Especially seeing someone smart and like kind in that field, I could see that as a role model. What were your intentions behind the content that you made so far? Like, what made you start with the reels and the topics that you have done so far?
I thought they are simply the basics, and they are also basics of quantum mechanics, not only basics of quantum computing. And I said, okay, if I can put these very simple things like, well, they're not that simple, but they are basics. So in this
Mhm.
sense, I mean, they are simple. And if people can react and maybe understand or interact with me, and I had some interaction, I just thought, oh, that would be great to try to break it down to these simple terms and not say what's advanced in the field. Just keep it basic. And then I extrapolated to posting some, I don't know, PhD positions, because I had that kind of audience on my page, and I was very happy, getting a text from someone saying, oh, thank you, I applied to this position. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Good luck.
It's kind of nice to have that feeling when someone messages you like that, or the comment like, "Hey, this is very helpful to me. Thank you." And who knows? Like maybe you'll just get someone who's doing their own physics research, and they look at
Yeah.
your content and it helps them figure out how to solve a problem.
Yeah.
I see you recently started a TikTok. Do you have any plans for that?
Not really, no.
Okay.
So I just took the Instagram videos and also shared them there, because I knew, okay, people there stay more for reals. But I think it will be a bit more difficult to find my audience there. And I really didn't invest in that channel at all. Like, I think I have 10 followers or so, if I
I mean,
have 10 followers.
now you have 11, so it's all good.
Oh,
Uh, I will say Anastasia grew her audience on there first, and it is one of the few platforms where you can grow the most, and education content does pretty well on there. It's interesting how when people, a lot of Gen Z, for example, they actually search on TikTok first before Google, and so
oh,
like it's actually kind of interesting the change of mindset there. Now
yeah,
with the
that's
whole
interesting.
yeah, with the whole TikTok ban in the U.S., that might change things, but I don't know.
Oh,
What it's
that
not
I didn't know.
it's not permanent yet, but it could be. But it's the third time it's gotten banned here, so we'll see. The reason why I brought it up is we were talking about content beforehand, and a lot of ideas that people talk about, they'll do on TikTok or Instagram, or they'll make a long form YouTube video. And one thing I can definitely see you doing is making more long form content, because I'm sure there's plenty of information you'll spew out once you get going, which is exactly how I am too. So I totally understand. I was trying to mention to you about the whole Substack thing, but even just like if you did YouTube and then taking your YouTube videos and chopping it up into short form content, then you put it on YouTube Shorts and Instagram and TikTok, and you just take that same video and post it like you did when you started the TikTok.
Ah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Well, I hope to see you from a year from now. You have a whole bunch of subscribers.
Ooh, let's hope.
Yeah. How do you manage your time at this point with everything going on?
So now it's summer.
Mm.
And I have the advantage that already at 5, there is so much light, which stays until 10, 11.
Wow.
So the days are super long. And by this, I also wake up quite early and go to bed quite late. So in the summer, I don't need much sleep. And I just try to focus more in the morning on the work that I have to do, on the things that I consider important. And then after lunch, to take care of things that are not so vital, meaning that they do not require so much focus on my side. For example, some meetings or a bit more, maybe relaxed homework or something of this sort. But mornings are my focusing moments. And
So you're
then,
more of an early bird? Sorry.
I would say so, yeah. And then I also try to do some sports in between. It really depends when. And
Yeah. What kind of sports?
oh, I love cycling.
Cycling. Okay, cool.
Yes,
It's
cycling is the best one, but I also go to the gym.
so it's good that you take care of yourself. I know that a lot of scientists, there is that kind of, at least here in the US, there's kind of this connotation, like if you're a scientist, if you're kind of nerdy, that you don't work out. And I think over the last 10 years, 15 years, that stereotype has changed quite a bit. But we realize, like, if you want to keep your brain going at the best capacity, you need to keep your body going too. There's that
Yes,
connection.
yes, exactly.
For anyone looking to how to improve that, this is a great book for that. Spark.
Ah, nice. Spark.
So you do sports, you do research, what do you do for fun at this point?
Sports.
Do you have any hobbies besides exercise?
I would say yes and no. I sometimes I have this, let's say, issue that I don't see hobbies as hobbies. I also want to see some results out of my hobbies.
Right.
Like even when I cycle, I just try to do a bit better next time. Or if I draw, so I'm sometimes drawing on my iPad, and I'm just trying to go for something a bit more challenging next time. Like I enjoy it, but I also want to see where my capacity is, like where I reach a boundary.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, I don't think that you're wrong on that at all. I think a lot of people see hobbies and they try to think that it's just for play, but hobbies aren't really that. Their hobbies are just what we call skills that we're not doing for our career. Yet, some hobbies can become your next career. Like maybe right now you're doing arts, and after your PhD or any kind of doctorate that you get, right, you end up moving into just pursuing art. Like you're like, I really actually am starting to enjoy this more and more. For the next 2 years, I want to make some art. I want to sell some art. I want to
Yeah.
make art, and that's what you do next. It's just like throwing it out there. That's kind of an example. And I think that when people get to their 80 years or 90 years old, they've done that so many times, and that's what makes them a polymath. I don't think you have to
Yeah.
be 80 years old to be a polymath, but I think that there's a lot of people who get to that age and they don't realize, oh, a lot of my hobbies were completely high level skills that were equivalent to my career, and yet I didn't ever realize that until I was old.
Yeah, I think it's normal and I think it can happen. And, people can change their job anytime they want. If they get, more interested in something else, why not trying it? Like you have
Yeah.
nothing to lose.
Yeah, and people think there's opportunity cost, and in some ways there is. But for the most part, you can always go back. You can always try again. There's no shame in that. People think there is, but it's like if you wanted to stop and go back, you could. And you started so strongly. You had that passion around fractals, and it just kind of snowballed into this. So you went from this to this to this to this to this and this, and it seems like a very positive trajectory.
Yes, and I also explore many fields in physics. Like I was interested in nuclear physics. I was interested in solid state physics, in string theory. Like I kind of explored everything a bit. And then one day, this is quite a funny story, how I got into quantum computing. It was during the pandemics and I was giving tutorials. And at some point, someone called me and asking me if I can teach them some linear algebra. And at that point, I got so many calls from different people who needed help with their exams. And I was thinking, oh no, there is someone else wanting help with their exams. And when I say help with their exams, meaning that they wanted me to help them solve their exams. And I'm totally against that.
Yeah.
And I thought it's this situation. And then the guy clarified it for me like, oh, no, I'm not a student. I'm a programmer. And I want to learn quantum computing. And I thought these are the basics. And I saw your profile.
Yeah.
And then just by teaching him a couple of things that I knew at that point, I started to get very interested in it. And I think he also fueled my passion at that point
Yeah.
because he pursued a master in this direction. And then I was like trying to study alongside him to see what people are doing and so on and so forth. And I just found it so cool that I said, okay, after I'm done with my master, I'm going for a PhD in this direction and let's just see what happens.
Mm. And I wish did you ever record those tutoring sessions?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think we might have had, but I don't remember. But they were in Romanian anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
nowadays that's not actually a big deal because there's so many translation tools, and
True.
probably plenty of Romanian people who want to learn as well. But I was just thinking, there's a lot of people who, instead of making a podcast or instead of just making a teaching YouTube, they'll do free coaching or free tutoring and just record the sessions. That's the exchange. Like, hey, I'll do this for you for free, but we get to record it and I'll post it to my channel. And maybe you could like block that person if they don't want to be seen or something like that. But that could be an interesting way of making content.
Oh yeah, that's a nice idea. I will look to see if I have any recordings. I don't remember exactly if we recorded or not, but maybe we did, and that would be cool actually.
Well,
Thank you.
and just like going forward too, or something like that, because there's so much you can offer, and I think that there is a lot of people in the world who don't make enough content, and you're already on the way of doing it. So if I could help accelerate your journey in some way, like you did with that friend, right? Like you helped him accelerate it in that computer science. I could do the same for content.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your profile, I enjoy collaborating with other researchers and experts from different disciplines and backgrounds. How do you think that helps being in a multidisciplinary group like that?
Oh, I think it's very nice to see different perspectives. Even, when you say physicists, they come with different backgrounds and different interests. Like you have quantum computing, you can have quantum information theory, and people have different understandings at different levels. And I think that's great, even in one discipline. But then you have mathematicians who see things a bit differently, or they just know other things that you don't know. And then you have the computer scientists who, again, know some things that you don't know. And I think it all comes together in a very, very nice way, and it kind of rounds up.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too, to think about there are people who are multidisciplinary, and they might be artistic and scientific, but also have hobbies in gardening or maybe very crafty with their hands. But then there's also people who are multidisciplinary who are kind of like what you're saying that you are going into, and that's the multi-physics person. So like, yes, you're multidisciplinary, but you're mainly multidisciplinary in the area of physics. You do this physics, this physics, this physics, this physics. And so it's an interesting distinction, and both are very important too.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree. And by the way, because you mentioned hobbies, I have a lot of plants. Some of them are alive. Yeah. And
Some of them are not.
Some are artificial actually.
Okay. Well,
so that's fair enough. So I can say that I love taking care of plants.
I have one plant. It's a succulent. I've kept it alive, but also succulents are very easy to keep alive, but also very easy to...
Yeah. I also have, I think, 2 of them, and that I can totally subscribe to that.
I don't know how I've kept it alive. I probably need to water it, actually. But again, that's one of those things where it's something that you might not have initially thought of when I asked you, like, what skills or hobbies do you employ? And hobbies are one of those things. When I have people come on the show, I try to look at their entire online presence because that's all I can see of them, right? I might talk to them before the call too. That doesn't happen very often, but I know we did because we wanted to get you comfortable on the camera or on the call, I mean. And it's interesting to think about, like, sometimes parents will consider parenting as one of their skills to be talked about. Or there's content creators and they want to talk about their content and just the act of making content around their subject. And then there's the actual subject, like in your case, quantum computing. And then there's other stuff too. And I try to dive into each of those aspects and highlight that part of your life, which is fun. It's fun digging into each of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has a lot of interests at the end of the day. I think it's just hard to remember all your interests because, maybe, I don't know, 1 week you're super hyped on something, then you forget for 2 months, then you're again hyped about it, and so on and so forth. And then you don't consider it as a hobby, but it's still there. Or, maybe you do it here and there, and it's still part of you.
When you get fixated on it every once in a while. Yeah. Something I ask all of my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
I would say it's a multidisciplinary person in the sense of knowing something on some subjects. It doesn't have to go on a deep level, but it has to have an understanding of it. Like maybe you don't know all the details of something, but you kind of know how it works and you understand the structure of it, even if, I don't know, maybe you cannot do the math behind it, for example, if it's something in mathematics, but you know how it works. Yeah. So
You
for
can
me,
understand the
that's,
system.
you can understand the system. And I think you can understand a system in everything, even if it's, I don't know, plant growth, you know,
Yeah.
you
It's
can just
a way of
get a
thinking.
feeling. Yeah.
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 It's like almost like a language that you understand because you're polymathic.
Oh yeah, that as well. By the way, I also had my period with languages as
Yeah.
a hobby.
How
Now
many
that
do
you
you
mentioned
speak?
it, currently I speak three languages. So I speak Romanian, English, and German. And then I can understand kind of all Latin languages. I cannot really speak them. And when I say understanding, I mean mostly if they are written.
Oh, okay.
I understand, I don't know, sometimes 50%, sometimes 80, sometimes 30,
Yeah,
depending,
depending.
you know, a lot on the topic. But I think it's something. So,
It is, yeah.
yeah, and I really love the structure behind languages. I utterly love it.
You're on your way to becoming a polyglot. Some might even
Maybe
consider you
one
one
day.
now. Well, some might even consider you now because polymath and polyglots, they both basically kind of have this rule of three. Like if you have three or more, you're essentially one of them. And so, like if you have three or
Mm.
more mastering disciplines, then you're a polymath. At least, and if you're curious too. But if you're like, if you master three or more languages, then essentially you're a polyglot. And so that's kind of like the mindset behind that. It is interesting you mentioned the Latin languages because before the call, we were talking about that you're from Romania. And when I looked at your last name for the first time, my brain went Italian because like Lefterovici. And I kind of just think that's where my brain kind of ended up going to. I'm trying to learn Mandarin right now.
Oh,
And
wow.
my
That's impressive.
pronunciation for, thank you, it's been weird, but it's good. I like it. It's a good challenge. In fact, I was relearning Spanish. I grew up from a Hispanic background, and so I grew up with Spanish. I can speak it pretty well. I can understand it relatively well. I can read it pretty darn well. But when it comes to other Latin languages, I've dabbled in French. I dabbled a tiny bit of Italian, and I know a couple words in Romanian. But it is interesting to think about when it comes to the cognates and the semblance of different Latin languages. At one point, there's someone in this field of polymathy who did his dissertation on polymathy, but he was Brazilian, so his thesis was in Portuguese, and I wanted to read it, and it hadn't been translated yet, and so I went down, I downloaded it, and I understood maybe 70 to 80% of it, despite the fact I don't really know any Portuguese. And
Yeah.
that was because of the cognates I knew from Spanish, even French, and even Italian. The little bit of Italian I knew, there was some cognates that I only knew from Italian that I didn't know from Spanish that'll help me read the Portuguese. And so it's really fascinating, the merging of these languages.
Yes, exactly. I also find it very fascinating.
Do you have a language you want to set out forth next?
Oh, maybe I would like to go back to French. So I learned French in school, and I think that's mostly the reason why I can also understand other Latin languages in terms of written language. And that would be on my list, but I don't know when, and it's a big if.
So far?
It's a big if I will go and actually do it or not.
Yeah. I was just asking how you were, and it's interesting to think about too the fact that you are more of a written. You can read it more, but I can hear it more. Like I can't really read Italian. I mean, I kind of can, but because of Spanish, but I can't read French really hardly at all. But I can definitely hear it and understand it. There was one day I was a cashier at a store, and this mom and a daughter were talking in a language I couldn't tell what it was yet. And so I'm just sitting there scanning their products, and they're talking, they're kind of looking at me, they're just kind of ignoring me. They didn't really even say hi or anything like that. It was funny. And then all of a sudden, the mom, I think, turns to me and starts speaking to me in French. And somehow I responded back in French. And we had a
Oh,
small conversation in French. And so I knew enough to hold my own. I didn't know what language they were speaking until they like were facing me because it was just too far away and I wasn't going to eavesdrop. But it was just kind of fascinating to think about like if they were closer, I could have figured it out. And I was walking past somebody a month ago, just on the street, and I could tell that they were speaking Arabic. I didn't know what they were speaking, but being able to identify the languages, I think, is another key aspect too.
Yes, indeed it is.
So being able to read languages, learning languages, polymathy, I figured with all the different multidisciplinary topics we've kind of jumped around today, I wanted to ask you that important question about what is a polymath to you. And I think your answer was really interesting. Kind of going back to that too, a concept that I've been toying with is this idea of the niche polymath. And so again, going back to the idea of the multiple physics polymath, like you have multiple expertise, astrophysics or quantum physics or laser physics and biophysics kind of thing. And so it'd be kind of interesting to think about that is like you're polymath, but you're in physics, a polymath of physics. And then beyond that, you start doing the gardening and the cycling and you start doing other stuff too. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
Uh, I guess YOLO.
Yellow? Fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is time to do a lot of things, and why not explore?
Yeah.
And why not explore also in the area that you started? Like, you explore a few things. If you don't like them, okay, just move to the next one. But maybe you would like one of these mini topics in your topic, so to say.
Yeah. So how do you feel that your degrees will impact your future career?
Oh, that's a very good question. I didn't thought about this deeply because I always went for the things that I like doing at
Yeah.
that point. But I think I can easily translate to industry, especially into quantum computing on the software part.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, I'm a theoretical physicist, so I don't really know much about the hardware.
Yeah.
I have nothing to do there, realistically speaking, unless I discover a deep passion for it and I go into it next. But yeah, I think transition to industry could be quite easy. And one can also try and stay in academia. I think I could also do that, but at the moment I don't know if I am interested in staying in academia because I still look for more practicality.
Yeah. My last guest, Frederica Brisson, she was kind of on the same path as you, multiple degrees, and she pursued her doctorate and she decided to leave and not become a professor. And I think that for her, that was a great choice. And that's what she said as well. And who knows, maybe that's your choice as well. I could send you the interview afterwards. And what is the most difficult problem you were facing in the moment in your research
That's a very
that you
hard
could talk about at
question.
least?
Yes. I'm not quite sure how to answer this because there are like many problems. um, but what I find quite hard is this part of complexity theory of algorithms. And people, they are always talking about asymptotic complexity, like worst case scenario. But in order to benchmark an algorithm, from my point of view at the moment, is also to try to see, okay, what are the minimum resources? So instead of the big O notation, to go to the omega notation and try to find some lower bounds on the algorithms. And I have no clue how to do that. I didn't see it much done in literature. Maybe other people don't see it so relevant, but I think when you actually try to benchmark something, like to try to evaluate the performance, I think that's important, especially for a simulation. And that's what we are kind of trying to do in our research. That's a very important part for us, the benchmarking and to go beyond the asymptotic complexity. So either to find prefactors in the big O notation, this we have an idea how to do that. We did it before. But now I'm also interested in these lower bounds that I just find quite complicated.
Yeah, it's like a
And yeah,
puzzle to solve.
yes.
For people who
Yes.
don't know, I've heard of it before. I don't really know myself very well. Can you explain what the big O notation is?
Yes, so it's the asymptotic complexity of an algorithm, like worst case scenario. For example, if I have a list with items and I want to go classically to find an item in this list, in the worst case scenario, I have to go through all of them. Maybe my item is at the end. And that's the big O notation. Like worst case scenario, I go over everything. best case scenario is, of course, I find it in the first time, right? And that could be a best case scenario. But you don't know where your item is. So you go for the worst case scenario every time. But when trying to benchmark something to make it like realistic, you are not always like in practice, at least what I saw until now with algorithms, is that the worst case scenario sometimes simply doesn't appear. And the prominent example for that is something called simplex algorithm, which has a very bad asymptotic complexity, but in practice is doing extremely well. As far as I understood, it's used in a lot of problems by computer scientists. And, for me, this is a sign that, hey, maybe this asymptotic complexity doesn't tell us so much about the practicality. It's interesting theoretically, it's very important theoretically, but what about the practicality?
Is there?
And
Oh yeah.
yeah, this is what I want to find out, how
This is-
things are in practice.
These are all very good topics too to make more content around as well. Is there
Yeah.
anything else in like traditional computer science you think could apply to quantum science or quantum computing science? I mean,
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I was just thinking like the methodologies, the mindset, or even just previous examples, previous endeavors.
Yes, I would say yes. I mean, it's an algorithmical thinking, right?
Mhm.
So you need to have it on the both ways, like what are the steps of an algorithm. But I don't know if this is actually restricted to computer scientists, because also when you solve a math problem, you also have to follow some steps and some logical order. And yeah, and on another level, yes, you can say things like the qubits are the quantum equivalent of bits, for example. So you can make some classical quantum correspondences this way. But the concepts behind, I think they are independent of a quantum computer scientist or a physicist. I think it's this in this logics area.
Yeah. And like going back to the bits and qubits, they're like bits off and on, but qubits being like off and on, and then like maybe, or is like just really kind of like both at the same time.
Yeah. At some point, I forgot what algorithm it was, but it was like some oracle that can tell you yes, no, or maybe, or I don't know.
Yeah,
You have a quantum oracle that tells you, I don't know.
which is interesting.
It's
Like,
quite
and
funny.
in our present state, we kind of see that as like, oh, I don't know, that's not an answer. But if we could figure out how to make that into an answer or how to use that, I don't know, as a fourth bit, essentially, then we can use like each state as almost like programmable. I don't know. At this point, I'm starting to lose my own train of thought. So
I think maybe you mean to flag something with it,
yeah, like
or
because like with bits, it's off and on, and then you have off and on with qubits, but then you have the maybe and I don't know, and I don't know if that could also count as like a flag.
I would say not really,
Not really.
because you still
No.
need to do the measurement, and when you do the measurement, you have an answer at the
Right.
end of the day. Like, of course, like along the circuit, if you want to see, I don't know, what's your state, you get a superposition, and maybe that's what you can interpret as a maybe, like have, I don't know, 30% chance of getting a 0, 70% chance of getting a 1, or whatever, depending what gets used. But at the end, you still have to measure, and you get 0 or 1.
And if
And then
the
you measure multiple times, and you see these probabilities.
and the act of measuring and observing is what changes it too, right?
Yes, I think interaction is what changes. I think interaction is the most important thing in physics.
Mm.
Also in nuclear physics, for example, you can see the radiation. You can detect it when it interacts with the detector. So you need this interaction to get information. From my point of view, maybe I'm wrong with this, but this is my understanding until now, that the interaction is very important
That
to
seems to
get
be aligned
information.
with what I've been told and learned in the past, but I'm also not a physicist, so I don't know. Do you have any other examples too? Just out of curiosity.
Nothing that pops into my head at the moment.
No worries. What do you have coming in the line that you're looking forward to?
I applied for some internships, and I'm curious if I will get any, And yeah, I think I would like to do an internship at a company working in quantum computing, just to see, also what's there. So I'm looking forward to this.
Internship seems like a great opportunity. If people wanted to find more about you, where can they find you online?
Oh, they can find me mostly on LinkedIn, I think, but also on Instagram. I also have a website, and yeah.
TikTok. What do you think could be like a call to action for our audience today?
I think what someone could do to improve is to continuously learning, but also to take breaks and relax,
Mm,
because I think that's where the growth is happening.
I like that.
And to never give up. It's like, okay, something doesn't work out. Okay, try harder. If it still doesn't work out, maybe try something else.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world if something doesn't work out the way you want it to.
I often talk about the skill tree learning approach. And when you get to a hurdle, a plateau in a skill, you either push past it, you try again. And if you fail, you try again. And if it gets to the point where you think that maybe I'm not ready to push past this yet, you switch to another part of the tree. And then once you've done that for a while, then you can go back and finish it.
Oh yes, that's really amazing. Yeah, yeah, I like this view.
Did you ever play video games much growing up?
Not really, no.
That's where I got the
Uh,
concept from, was from video games. That's why I thought I'd
ah,
ask.
no, I played here and there, but I was never got caught up by a game.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, once again, this is Dustin PolyInnovator and Andreea Lefterovici on the Polymath Podcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.